Picture this: a hot summer night and suddenly the lights go out. Not from a storm, but from a trade war. In early 2025, millions of Americans nearly faced a blackout. Not from nature, but from a political decision miles away. The culprit? An escalating trade dispute with Canada, our neighbor and key energy partner. We take electricity for granted, flip a switch, and it's there. But what if it isn't? The standoff with Canada exposed a hidden vulnerability. Much of our power comes from across the border. This wasn't a distant policy debate, it was a direct threat to daily life, cooking, heating, even hospital care. The crisis began with tariffs on steel and aluminum, but quickly spiraled into an energy showdown. Suddenly, Americans in states like New York and Michigan realized just how much they rely on Canadian electricity. The near blackout was a wake-up call. Our modern lives are more fragile and more interconnected than we think. When politics cross wires with power, the consequences can hit home in an instant. The spark for this crisis wasn't in a power plant, but in Washington, D.C. In 2025, the U.S. slapped steep tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and, crucially, energy. Canada hit back fast. Ontario's premier threatened a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to U.S. states. He even warned he'd cut the power with a smile. This wasn't just tough talk. Over 30 high-voltage lines connect our grids, powering millions of American homes. The U.S. gets clean, reliable hydropower, Canada gets a steady market. Suddenly a trade spat over metals threatened to pull the plug on that partnership. Both sides stepped back before the lights went out, but the message was clear. Energy can be weaponized. The tariffs meant to show strength instead exposed a critical weakness. Canada reminded us disrupt trade, and your power could be next. The warning was delivered, and it won't be forgotten. Most Americans don't realize how much of their electricity comes from Canada. For states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, Canadian power isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. Canada exports enough electricity to power over 5 million U.S. homes. In winter, New England can get up to 15% of its power from Canada. If that supply vanished, utilities would scramble, prices would soar, and blackouts could follow. Our grids are physically linked, massive transmission lines deliver power daily. The threat to cut supply wasn't empty, it targeted a real vulnerability. Grid operators count on Canadian electricity. Losing it would mean emergency measures and chaos. This episode exposed a national security blind spot. Energy isn't just about oil or gas, it's about the power that keeps our lives running. We've quietly become dependent on a neighbor for a resource we can't live without. Even without a blackout, tariffs and surcharges would have sent electricity bills soaring. For families already squeezed by inflation, higher utility costs would hit hard. But the pain wouldn't stop there. Power disruptions ripple through the economy. Factories halt, businesses close, supply chains stall. Tariffs had already raised car prices. An energy crisis would make everything cost more. The human cost? Imagine New York or Detroit in the dark traffic chaos, stranded commuters, and hospitals relying on backup generators. Hospitals can't run on emergency power forever. Lives would be at risk. The dispute strained more than the grid. It strained decades of trust between the U.S. and Canada. Using electricity as a bargaining chip sets a dangerous precedent for all shared resources. Once trust is broken, it's hard to repair. The cost of a blackout isn't just economic. It's about safety, security, and the fabric of our partnership. The 2025 blackout scare was a crisis averted, but the warning is clear. America's energy independence is, in many regions, an illusion. We've traded security for convenience, relying on Canadian power for decades. Now, even clean energy projects are seen as risky if a trade spat can shut them down. The path forward? Build a more resilient, self-sufficient grid, invest in domestic sources, upgrade infrastructure, and rethink what cheap really means. The price of resilience is high, but the cost of inaction is higher. Should America's power switch be controlled from across the border? The lights stayed on this time, but the next crisis could be just a signature away. It's time to decide. Will we take back control of our own power?